Hey now! NecroVMX here, and I'm back with another SNES RPG review, and this time I'm covering another game that you've definitely heard of and probably played, Secret of Mana. A game so widely considered a classic that it even made it onto the SNES Mini, and, well, I'm not a huge fan. Never have been. Yeah. To give a bit of history, Secret of Mana is in Japan known as Holy Sword Legend 2. The original was on the Game Boy and was released in the United States as Final Fantasy Adventure, and it was released in Europe as Mystic Quest. I was a big fan of Final Fantasy Adventure on the Game Boy, and I was looking forward to the planned sequel, which was almost even called Final Fantasy Adventure 2, before being rebranded as Secret of Mana. And this is when I found out that sometimes you can just be really disappointed in something that you've looked forward to. But to my surprise, I found out later in life that most people love this game and tend to explain away its flaws. Is it a matter of most people having nostalgia goggles on and remembering the game as being better than it actually was? Or am I just grumpy and I have high standards? Well, recently on Twitch I played through the game on a Saturday night stream, which is when I play through all the games in a series, and the Mana series was the first one that I tackled, deciding to play through as many of them as I could, even Secret of Mana, which I had not played through in a very long time, and finally just decided to get all my cards on the table. Maybe I'll enjoy it more than I used to, maybe I'll hate it more than I used to, maybe I'll feel the same, but either way, should be interesting, right? And now I'm doing a review. Whoo boy. As usual, I'll be rating Secret of Mana on a scale from 1 to 10 in the following categories: graphics and presentation, music and sound effects, story and writing, gameplay and controls, and balance and difficulty. And once again, I should mention, as I always do, that on a 10-point scale, the way I do things is having 5 as being average, not 5 being bad, meaning that a 7 is not an average score, a 7 is a good score. I know if I neglect to say it just once, that's the one time that it'll be an issue. So, let's address the elephant in the room. Almost immediately after releasing the SNES, Nintendo had the idea to release a CD add-on, and they worked with companies like Sony and Philips to make it happen before they eventually abandoned it after seeing how badly the Sega CD did. So why is this relevant? Because Secret of Mana was originally planned to be a CD game, a launch title for the add-on likely, and Square was pretty far in development when they found out that the CD add-on was not going to happen, and they had to make the game work for a standard SNES cartridge. A lot of content was cut, including huge chunks of the game's script and gameplay. But if the move from CD to cartridge hurt the graphics, well, at least they were still left with a good-looking game. Secret of Mana is colorful, almost garishly so at times, almost as if Square were overcompensating for the fact that the first game was on the monochromatic Game Boy. The sprites are larger than average for the time, comparable to the sprites used in other RPGs released the same year, such as the Seventh Saga, Illusion of Gaia, except the Secret of Mana has a lot more animation, color, and expressiveness. Whatever faults Secret of Mana may have, none of them have anything to do with the graphics, which are colorful, vibrant, and cartoony, with a good amount of detail for the time. There's also a lot of use of Mode 7, from the canon travel scenes to flying around the overworld later in the game, and of course Mode 7 is something that just still looks cool to me, so I appreciate that. The only issue with the graphics is that it seems very easy for graphical glitches to occur, the biggest of which happens if the game doesn't like when your character levels up. It can change the color palette of the entire screen, leading to some weird-looking screens, and this happens a lot more often than it really should. Most jarringly, after defeating the game's final boss, it almost always happens. The game's presentation is mostly centered around a ring menu system, keeping the HUD pretty clear. The only thing on the screen that you'll see are your character's health and power meters. Menus are relegated to minimalistic ring menus with simple icons that might take a few moments to adjust to, but are very easy to understand. It's almost as if the developers were so proud of the game's graphics that they didn't want anything obscuring them. This, though, leads to the one issue that I have with the presentation, and that's speech boxes, which are all transparent. Sometimes this makes them kind of hard to read. Thankfully, Secret of Mana offers alternative patterns to give the speech boxes something of a background, but they're all either slightly transparent themselves or they're dithered, meaning that no matter what, you're not reading text on a single color, which can just look bad. This is a pretty minor issue. Just find an option that is less offensive to the eyes and play. It's not like there's a whole lot of speech in this game as it is. For graphics and presentation, I give Secret of Mana an 8 out of 10. Moving on to the music and sound effects, the good news is the music is quite good. From the iconic theme song to the great dungeon themes, overworld themes, town songs. Sadly, we don't get any upgraded versions of songs from the Game Boy title, though later games in the World of Mana series would do that, as early as Trials of Mana, which I already reviewed. I do, of course, wonder what Secret of Mana's original soundtrack would have sounded like on a CD, and I'm surprised that Square didn't release a CD version of its soundtrack back in the day. Though I guess the game did eventually get a remake with different audio. I haven't played that, and I can't comment on it much. Secret of Mana's sound effects, on the other hand, range from average stock-sounding effects to just plain ear-piercing nonsense, which definitely drags the game's audio down quite a bit. Though it's not my favorite soundtrack of the time, I prefer Lufia's songs for instance, Secret of Mana has some really good songs, and overall the audio experience is only slightly marred by some annoying sound effects. I'll give Secret of Mana an 8 out of 10 for music and sound effects. For story and writing, Secret of Mana fails to live up to the standards set by its prequel, which is really sad considering that was a Game Boy game. You play as 3 characters, Randy, Prim, and Papoy. Randy's a kid from a village who happens upon the rusted Mana sword and is exiled after getting into a fight with a monster living under the village. He meets Prim after not too long, who is trying to catch up with her boyfriend, who has become involved in a political conflict that never really seems to be fleshed out, and Papoy is a magical sprite who lost his memory, who just sort of tags along promising to help you in return for the company and hoping to get his memory back. Almost all of the darker and more mature themes of the first game are gone, replaced by a pretty standard fantasy story, where an evil empire is trying to gain power of mana and you need to stop them. There is a lot more dialogue than in the first game, but it's about the same quality, which, as I noted earlier, is disappointing considering you're going from the Game Boy to the SNES. I expected better. I was just never all that interested in Secret of Mana's story or its characters. My biggest takeaway is that they didn't try to force a contrived romance between Randy and Prim, so that's good, but yeah, not all that interesting. Like most of the Mana games, the game also tries to be funny, but most of the time I found the characters to either be mildly annoying or just plain creepy. I'm looking at you, Papoy. Even the game's finale, which is visually impressive as all hell, comes out of left field from a narrative standpoint, with a last boss that is just sort of there to be something to fight. The game tries to make you feel bad for fighting the last boss while forcing you to do so. Yeah. This isn't a new direction for the series either. The next game in the series, Trials of Mana, offered up a more mature storyline that was more in line with the first game, and even the lighthearted entries after this would touch on darker or more mature themes. But it seems that Secret of Mana plays it very safe, and at times it plays it very silly. I mean, what passes for a plot here gets derailed at one point, so that you can save Santa Claus. I wish I was making this up. For failing to make me care about the characters or the plot at all with its sheer generic blandness, I give Secret of Mana a 3 out of 10 for story and writing. For gameplay and controls, this is where I really get to unload on this game. The first game was rather simple, with a very Zelda-inspired approach to gameplay. Secret of Mana tries to differentiate itself from its Zelda-styled prequel, but it stumbles in nearly every way. First off, there are 3 characters here. You start off controlling Randy, but as soon as either Prim or Papoy joins you, you can switch to them at any point by using the select button. Any character can use any style of weapon. Instead of buying new weapons along the way, you upgrade the ones that you find on forges and level up a character's skills with that weapon. You're supposedly encouraged to mix things up and change your character's weapons, but generally you should probably stick to one weapon type for each character, though occasionally you'll need to use a weapon as a tool, such as a sword for cutting plants, or a whip to get across a gap, or a bow to hit a distant switch. This all sounds good, but the actual combat is a mess. Firstly, power attacks return, although it works differently now. You swing your sword and the power meter goes from 100% down to 0% and then climbs back up. It's not really all that slow, but it takes a few seconds to get back to full strength. The attack's damage is based on how full your power meter is, but anything less than 100% might as well be 0%. You can swing or fire your weapon as fast as you can, but you'll probably do no damage at all or scratch damage at best if you're at less than 100%, forcing you to either back off for a few seconds or switch to a different character. While you're controlling one character, the other two are controlled by AI, and they generally don't do a whole lot, though you can set how aggressive they are in the menus. It basically means how close do they need to be to an enemy before they try to attack it. You can also charge your weapon once it's leveled up a bit, and use a charge attack. You hold down the button for a really long time, and there's different levels of power attacks by doing this. This can be helpful sometimes, but it takes a really long time to charge enough to get a good attack. This all may not seem that bad, but the big issue comes with the collision detection and the game's bizarre approach to hit stun. When you do successfully hit an enemy, it's generally stunned for a small amount of time, and if you hit it again while it's stunned, that will count as damage, but there's a lot of lag before that damage actually registers. The damage numbers from the first hit need to go away completely, meaning that you can hit an enemy with Randy, stun it, and then switch over to Prim and strike it with her weapon. The enemy will sit there doing absolutely nothing until the damage numbers from Randy's strike goes away, and suddenly it'll react to Prim's strike even if it's several seconds later. This can get annoying when you're trying to control where an enemy is, and one of your AI companions hits it, meaning that in a few seconds it'll be pushed in a different direction that you're not prepared to deal with. It may not be explaining this all that well, but essentially, if you hit a stunned enemy while there's still damage numbers on the screen, it won't react to the hit right away. It looks jank, it feels jank, it is jank. The other issue is the absolutely terrible hit detection. You'll miss more often than not, even if there's no reason that you should. And although enemies don't damage you by contact alone, they can push you around or sometimes throw you or bounce you around the screen. Pretty early on, you'll reach a dungeon where you're forced to ignore as many enemy encounters as you can, due to the fact that they outnumber you and will juggle you around the screen until you're dead, and you can't do anything about it. The hit stun issues that work on the enemies work the same way on the characters, meaning that if 3 enemies hit you at the same time, you must resign yourself to watching your character bouncing around the screen, taking damage for quite a while. So there's also magic. This is what you get after a while, and it does help, but not in a good way. Only 2 of the characters can actually use magic, and since melee combat becomes completely obsolete at this point, especially on bosses, this renders Randy, the main character, pretty much useless until he gets to do something at the very end of the game. Most boss battles consist of switching to Papoy and spamming spells as fast as you can. You could use a spell and then use the next spell as soon as you can bring up the menu, essentially stun-locking every boss into whatever flavor of damage you wish, making this completely boring. Maybe you take a hit and Prim heals you, but for the most part, only Papoy is of any use in boss battles. Which brings me to another thing, the multiplayer. Yeah, they tried that. With a multi-tap, you could play with up to 3 players, with each controlling one of the characters, though you all have to be on the same screen, and if you thought the bad AI pathfinding got you stuck a lot, wait until you're yelling at your friend to keep up because the screen won't move while they're slashing at flowers. And of course, one person gets stuck playing as the completely useless Randy. Secret of Mana has a few fun parts, most of them being in the middle of the game. The beginning part, before you have magic, is infuriating, and the entire endgame is as dull as dishwater. Secret of Mana isn't fun to play. It's poorly optimized with a broken battle system. For gameplay and controls, I give Secret of Mana a 3 out of 10. For balance and difficulty, well, there is no balance, and all the difficulty is front-loaded at the very beginning of the game. Once you have Papoy and access to attack magic, it becomes a snap, though you have to stop to level up your character, or your weapon skills, or your magic skills. For the most part, once you get some magic, the game is trivial. Just figure out which element works and keep using it. And if none of them work particularly well, just hit an enemy with whatever until it dies. Most of the difficulty in this game comes from enemies dogpiling on you and bouncing your character around like a truckload of basketballs that fell out of the back of the truck. If you decide to try to use a more melee-focused approach, this game is basically impossible to play. If you use magic, it's way too easy. Secret of Mana has almost no balance at all. The only bosses in the game that are difficult are nearly impossible to beat without knowing exactly what to do, and the rest of them don't serve any purpose at all other than to come onto the screen and get stun-locked to death. For balance and difficulty, I give Secret of Mana a 2 out of 10. So, yeah, when talking about Secret of Mana, it's very easy to say nice things when you're talking about the game's audio and the game's visuals, but actually playing it is a nightmare. and I really don't get the whole idea of this being a classic. Sure, maybe it was the first big action RPG that you played back in the day, and you have a lot of nostalgia for it, but being realistic, it came out the same year as The Illusion of Gaia, which, I mean, okay, that has a ridiculous story, but it's a really fun, tight game. And let's not forget that Trials of Mana on the same system is infinitely better, or that even Final Fantasy Adventure on the Game Boy is better. At the least, the eventual release of Dawn of Mana would relieve this game of the burden of being the worst one in the series, because, wow, Dawn of Mana is really bad, but this is one that, yeah, I'm glad I played through it, but boy am I glad that I basically never have to talk about it again. It's just not that good. The overall score for Secret of Mana comes out to 4.8 out of 10, just a shade below average, which sums up how I feel about it. I'd much rather listen to the soundtrack than actually play the game.